Hi everyone, this is Mr. Nobody. Today I'm bringing you kind of a book review and kind of a general discussion about something. So I want to talk about something that is near and dear to my heart, and it is this Carl Barks' Uncle Scrooge and Donald Duck comics. So, first thing I want to tell you, I grew up on these. Not just me, my dad grew up on them. Back in the time when they're written, 50s, tons of people grew up on them. There was a time when this was the most widely read periodical of this kind in the world. Disney published these all over the world. And Carl Barks, he's the most famous writer of these comic books. There were other writers, of course. Back when they first started making them, they didn't actually put the names of who wrote the comic books on them. And people just knew there was some particular The Good Duck author. And they knew he was particularly good. He wrote these really rich stories. He's the person, Carl Barks, who invented Uncle Scrooge. The character, he sort of took the concept of Donald Duck and took it and created a whole universe. He created Duckburg. He created all these characters that, if you grew up watching something like DuckTales, you know about, like Magic and Dispel and the Beagle Boys and Flintheart Glumgold. All of that comes directly out of the Carl Barks comic books. And it's great that we've actually had two different adaptations of the Barks universe with two different versions of DuckTales. And it's also given birth to other related properties, like Darkwing Duck, and some not so good ones like Quack Pack and, other more mistaken things. But this is the original source. This is the original Bible. Now, they print these wonderful books that collect them, collect this story. They print 2 of these a year. I tucked away, and my parents' house still have all the originals, the original actual old ones. My dad and I spent years and years and years collecting them, but of course a lot of them are not in fantastic shape. Sometimes they get lost, sometimes they get destroyed, but we have a massive collection of these. And I will just say, in my opinion, this is some of the greatest children's literature you can possibly buy. These are a delight for all ages. Whenever my family gets together, I have 10 nieces and nephews. Whenever we get together as a family, we bring these. We used to bring the big tubs of all the old ones. Now we tend to bring these a bit more. We still bring some of the old ones. And the kids, all the way up to the kids who are like 18, 19 in college, a certain amount of time will be spent just sitting around and reading them. They are such fun stories. They're so much fun to read as an adult. They're so much fun to read as a kid. When I was a kid, I always said that everything I knew, I learned from Donald Duck comic books. I used to do things like this Brain Bowl and Knowledge Bowl, and I was from a very small town, and I knew an immense amount about all sorts of random things, history and geography. And I'll just say, yeah, I learned that from a comic book, because they're rich adventure stories that take place the world over. They're funny. They've got great characters. I really like the perspective in them. I like the philosophical perspective. It's brilliant satire, in the same way today we might have some children's cartoon and, or just cartoon, and we're like, actually, that's a really brilliant entertainment. Actually, The Simpsons is really smart, and we really remember all the stories, and this is the early version of that. This is really that prototype of that sort of entertainment for children that is just put so much care was put into it, so much thought, research, cleverness. It truly is a work of art. And he really did build a whole world with distinctive characters, with distinctive personalities, places that they go and come back to. So it's just great. And my older daughter, she really learned to read with these because she looked at it and the pictures were very engaging. Carl Barks writes at a very approachable level of writing. And so she could follow the story through the pictures. and was working on the words, and she really wanted to understand what was going on, and so she learned her words more and more. And she just spent so much time reading these, eventually she became a fantastic reader. And you can see he was very smart. He wouldn't overcrowd the pages. His art is really nice. He has language, but nothing too long, nothing too complex. I'm going to make a really quick aside after having said that, and the aside is that there was a follow-up person to Karl Barks who loved him and who actually carried on the world in his stories, and that is Don Rosa. And I would say this is the closest thing you can get to Karl Barks. There are Karl Barks imitators in countries all over the world, because in some countries, Donald Duck comics are still incredibly popular, especially in Europe, especially in Scandinavia. Up until recently, when they made it illegal, Donald Duck was the most likely political candidate to be found on election forms, because whenever people had, I forget what this thing was, Denmark, whenever people didn't like the choices, they would just write in Donald Duck. And then they had the problem where Donald Duck actually won a large enough portion of the vote that it would have meant he basically deserved to have representation in their government, that they said, okay, you can't vote for Donald Duck anymore. Now, I really respect Don Rosa. He's done these great follow-ups on the world. Some of his stuff, particularly his slapstick, is really great. Altogether, I've got about 32 of these. They're still putting them out. I just got one 2 days ago, a new one, with some stories I was very happy to see again after all these years. But there's tons of these. And as I said, then there are these Don Rosa ones. The Don Rosa ones are good. I wouldn't quite put them on the same level as Karl Barks. Some of their slapstick ones, like this McDuck Tower one, this is a fantastic slapstick one. One thing about Don Rosa, tends to be a lot wordier. Not as much in this particular one, but he'll have more complicated language and a lot more words per page than Karl Barks would. This isn't a great example of it. You really see it in the Life and Times of Scrooge McDuck, but that's a series that is very much for like hardcore readers. But his art is great. It's very Karl Barksian. He captures the stories. They're very funny. I feel like he has a slightly greater prejudice. He's more sympathetic towards Uncle Scrooge. He pushes him further into like just a pure positive character, whereas I think Barksy's a little more complex. And then I'd say he's also a little more negative on Donald, whereas Barks was a little more positive on Donald. And Scrooge and Donald are both sort of flawed and actually very similar people that have just kind of gone slightly different directions in life. Anyway, so I definitely recommend the Don Rosas, but if you're going to get one or the other, jump into Karl Barks first. The stories also have great lessons in them. They're not particularly moralistic. It's not like He-Man where you get to the end and it says, the lesson today is friendship is always the best way, and, dishonesty never prospers. It's not like that. Karl Barks doesn't tell you what to think. He writes funny stories that often have certain twists to them, ironies, and they're always very complex. His world is a somewhat tragic one. He's a guy who really struggled and went through a lot of difficult things in his life, and there is a certain amount of his world reflects life. You've got someone like Donald who loses his temper, is a very imperfect person, and there are characters like Gladstone that just drive him bananas because Gladstone is a completely dissipated person. He never does any work, but he's just lucky and fortune favors him. And you know what? A lot of the time Gladstone just wins, and all Donald can do is just sort of look at it and end up disappointed, or to get philosophical. There's one of my favorite endings to a story involves Donald and Gladstone kind of suckering each other back and forth over these gems and this land, and in the end, Gladstone ends up completely rich, getting this meteorite full of gems, and Donald ends up with just this original diamond that started all. And then he's like, well, at least I got the diamond. And he hands it to the kids, and the kids look at it, and the kids say, actually, this is a zircon. And for a moment, Donald's eyes just sort of go blank. And then the next scene is wonderfully painted, and he just says, well, that's a nice sunset anyway. You know, so I really like that sometimes all you can do with life is fall back on a sense of humor, or fall back on your family, or fall back on being philosophical, because sometimes life is kind of unfair. And sometimes things do work out, but not for Donald, but not the way that you might think. And sometimes Gladstone does get a reward just for being this annoying lucky guy. He wins the thing. But sometimes, because Donald ends up pursuing some higher goal than the basic goal of whatever the competition was about, he actually gets a greater long-term reward, which is saying, yeah, he didn't win the fishing contest, but he ends up saving someone's life instead and gets a larger reward for that. So there is a moral thread going through it, but it doesn't pull punches about the world. It's not didactic. It does a lot of satire of people and what they're like. It's unapologetic about the fact they're greedy people, they're angry people, they're petty people, they're stupid people, jealousy, and it often gets a lot of its humor out of just showing the stupid things that, Donald Duck does. The Uncle Scrooge stories are also a lot of fun. There's a ton of adventures in there. There's a lot of heists, battles with villains, finding treasures. If I had to pick one of these to start with, this would actually be my top pick. This is my favorite single album. This is Uncle Scrooge, The Seven Cities of Gold. One of the interesting things about Carl Barks is his art is so sumptuous and so detailed. And when he draws a house, like, say, Grandma Duck's house, he carefully populates it with period-appropriate furniture that is the furniture the person of that age would have owned. And then he does these wonderful drawings of scenes and places around the world. And the funny thing is, Barks himself did not travel. Instead, Barks was a big fan of National Geographic. And so he would buy National Geographics, and he would read about the places, and then he'd be, ooh, I'm going to do a story about them traveling to that place. And so this one, not a real place, but this is about the seven cities of Cibola, and searching for those lost cities. And so you end up with this wonderful artwork about all these places around the world. He'll do these very large. Here, let me find you one that's impressive. So you see these single panels that are just incredible. So this is in Scandinavia. This is the legendary lemmings going over the cliff, which it's not really like that. But the idea of it is very fun. But you can see the way he's rendered the cliffs, the fjords, the Nordic Sea up there, and the scale. And so the art in these is just incredible. I can't say enough about how amazing the art is, how much it pulls you into the situations, just how much fun the characters are. It's just, it's so neat. There's so much neat stuff in here. And his action scenes are just great, and the detail in them. He puts so much more into them than it makes any sort of sense. So if I was going to pick a single book, pick that one up. Give it to your kid, any age. I really feel like these are any age stories. But if you can give it to a kid who's just learning to read, it will be wonderful for them. It will expand their vocabulary. It will expand their mind. It will entertain them. They're just wonderful books. They're at the absolute top of my recommendation of books for children. So I just want to show you, this is an example, just the sort of humor that you get in this. Uncle Scrooge, notoriously not happy about letting people visit him, calling this old messenger boy Sonny. I almost wasted a shot getting a message, the Beagle Boys are back, and, get to work, and like the energy in these pictures. It's a wonderful wonderful how much he puts into them, and it makes it so funny. So they're fantastic stories. Okay, so I want to bring up one of these stories. This is an example of what I mean by there's interesting and strangely complex lessons in it. So in this story, it shows Donald and the kids working on a farm. It's Uncle Scrooge's farm. Donald doesn't like doing the work. The kids actually enjoy doing the work. They think it's fun to work at things, to help the animals, to take care of them. And Uncle Scrooge, he's a bit of a penny pincher, of course. He's not paying them very much. He says, "You would do it different. I'm going to raise their wages to 10 cents a week." And so, he's still a bit of a penny pincher. But he's out there. Scrooge has his giant bin of money, which he's keeping in a corn crib. And then what happens is Donald basically is like, I'm not, Scrooge says, "You're being selfish." And Donald says, "I'm not being selfish. I wish everyone had $1 million. Then nobody would have to work." And then his cousin Gladstone comes by and he convinces Gladstone to basically wish for that. And he's so lucky a storm comes up and it actually takes all of Uncle Scrooge's money and it all goes away. And the kids are like, "Oh my gosh, Uncle Scrooge, you're impoverished. You lost all your money." And so the kids say, "Your money's gone, Uncle Scrooge. It'll be scattered all over the country." And he says, "So what? If I stay here and tend to my beans and pumpkins, I'll get it all back." And the kids think he's crazy. Donald, $1 million does drop into his hat. $1 million ends up dropping into everyone's hat. And as a result, Scrooge just says, "Just stay here and we'll keep working on the farm and we're going to get it all back." And so then it turns out everybody is rich. Everybody has $1 million. And this is, of course, when $1 million is a ton of money. But nobody's doing anything anymore. No one's actually working. No one's actually producing anything. And so suddenly they realize that they can't buy food. They can't get gas because nobody's doing their jobs anymore. They can't get anywhere. They say, "Well, why don't we try going to a different town?" And he says, "We better walk." So they said, "Well, let's go buy some boots." And the guy says, "Boots? Nobody even makes boots anymore. And if you want clothes, you're out of luck." He says, "Nobody raises the sheep to make wool. Nobody makes the wool into the cloth. Nobody makes skip it." And it says, "Everybody has $1 million. Nobody has to work." Scrooge makes this point, basically. This is the funny thing, he actually makes the point that the money's worthless. And he makes that claim, and he says, money itself is worthless. But then what happens is he gives the kids guns, and he says, "Guard the eggs, soon they'll be the only eggs. Guard the cabbages, soon they'll be the only cabbages." That's become what's worth. And so days and days go by, and finally Donald and Gladstone come walking back. They become looking like hobos. All they have is their sacks of money. And he's walking back saying, "I hope Uncle Scrooge will let me have my job back. You can have it, my million too. I'm going back to fishing." And so Scrooge says, "Sure, you can have your jobs back, but if you want it, the eggs are $1 million a piece." And then other people come back and find the prices have become somewhat steep. And pretty soon Scrooge has all the money back. And Donald says, "I'm the richest man in the world again, yay." And Donald says, "You claim that money's worthless, yet you've cornered the whole mountain of it. How come?" And he says, "You wouldn't understand it, nephew. I love money. I like to dive around in it like a porpoise, burrow through it like a gopher, toss it up, let it hit me on my head." Donald just says, "Disgusting." So it's a funny story. It's silly. It doesn't tell you what to think about it. You have to actually put some brains into to say, what is it trying to say? It is making a point about actually it's the work that's valuable, not the money. Why does Scrooge value money? That's not always clear. That's complex. Don Rosa tries to simplify it and say, "Oh, it's because it represents money." Karl Barks is more ambiguous. Scrooge does just seem to enjoy it. He does just seem to actually have fun with it. His work is his fun. His money is his fun. It's the thing he just enjoys. And that's what it is. Maybe the money's just symbolic of that. And he literally just enjoys it as a plaything, just something to play with. He doesn't want to spend it. It's very strange. But that's a good example of what I mean by a more sort of moralistic story. There's another one in that same book where Donald finds out that there's rare coins in Scrooge's bin, and so he gets some of them and sells them, is making all this money, and then Scrooge pays him an entire sack full of them, and then Donald goes to sell those, and the guy says, "Oh my gosh, please hide these, get rid of these. We didn't even know this many existed. You're going to destroy the rare coin market." Um, so there's this complex back and forth and one-upsmanship and people trying to outwit each other. It's very entertaining. I could go on forever about these stories. In the end, this is one where Donald does actually win and gets the better of Uncle Scrooge. But there's just too many stories to talk about. Like I said, there's literally thousands and thousands of pages of them. And they cover many different genres, many different characters. You get different types of characters, stories, depending on which character you're talking about. So there's an enormous amount of variety. It's not even a single genre. So I would definitely, if you wanted to pick up a second book, this would be another one of my recommendations. The Terror of the Beagle Boys is the very first Beagle Boys. They end up looking a bit different than this. This is how they look in their first appearance. In much the same way, Uncle Scrooge in some of his first appearances has a somewhat different look, and then over time, as he develops the character, he's like, I'm going to make him more like this. Let's change the color of his coat this way. Let's reduce his whiskers a little bit. And gradually the characters become more complex. And then I want to just show you, this is my third recommendation, if you're going to buy a third one, is the Uncle Scrooge, Only a Poor Old Man. This is another classic one. It's an early Beagle Boys one. It's an early type of the story that often happens, which is the Beagle Boys are out of jail. They want Scrooge's money. Scrooge is trying to find some place to hide it where it will be safe from them, and goes through this back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. In this case, he's hidden it in a lake. There's some wonderful artwork in this one. It becomes very poetic. The Scrooge is finally tired out and he's giving up. And he hears it happening. The Beagle Boys hear the noise. Their nose is breaking. Donald comes to save Scrooge from the disaster. And then it all comes crashing down. Look how much time he must have put into drawing all that, just for that one scene. It's fantastic. And in the end, he does conquer, actually, through his cleverness, through outwitting them. And then it's got a great lesson at the end where throughout the entire story, Scrooge is trying to tell Donald what a comfort his money is while he's going through all of this. And there's a great bit at the end. He says, I finally have time to tell you about what a comfort is to all this money. And Donald says, if you've got comfort, I'll take vanilla. Shut up and pay off. And he says, you may not know it, Uncle Scrooge, but your billions are a pain in the neck. You're only a poor old man. And for a moment, you do see this self-reflection, too, of Scrooge. But the truth is, he actually enjoys the struggle. He enjoys the fight. And as he said, no one is poor who gets to do what he enjoys once in a while. And what he likes doing is diving around in his money like a porpoise and burrowing it through it like a gopher and tossing it up and letting him hit him on his head. This book, as I said, this one is one that really does a lot to humanize Scrooge and provides him backstory, complexity. You start to see these distinctive things about him in this Only a Poor Old Man story. And another thing which ends up becoming a big part of his character is his past, the story of him as a prospector, of Glittering Goldie, of the Goose Egg Nugget, how he started his fortune, all these things that end up becoming a very big part of the Uncle Scrooge character. And it is a great story, and then the end of it especially humanizes it. It's great where you get this wonderful bit. So, who would come to collect $1 billion from a starving old woman? Scrooge McDuck. Scrooge McDuck. Oh, he would do it. He would try to take $1 billion out of a starving old woman. But then, as I said, it humanizes it. So what you realize at the end is they have a contest, gold digging contest, which is actually Scrooge's idea. It's because he genuinely feels guilt. And you find, for the first time, see Scrooge genuinely feeling guilt and feeling bad and also feeling respect, where he sees her walking away without ever looking back. And I love how Barks will do stuff like this black shadow relief. He does this kind of trickle out. He's very clever about how he sets up his scenes. So they have a lot of pathos. And then Donald knows that Scrooge is actually faking being as greedy as he is, He's wailing, saying, "Oh, I forgot that's where I'd hidden the nuggets because I didn't take my medicine." And the kids are like, "Ugh, what a disgusting, greedy old guy." And Donald says, "Come over here." No. He says, "No, I swiped Uncle Scrooge's pillbox. He did take his medicine. He's pretending." And they say, "What do you know?" So Scrooge doesn't want to show that he's a softie. He grew up so what you get now is this complex character who went through these really tough situations, keeps up this very tough front, but deep down actually does have a heart. But it's not like he's just going to change. He's always going to be that person who keeps up that tough front, but deep down he does have a heart. And so that's where you see his character really being enlarged and enriched, and not just someone to laugh at, not just even an opponent, but actually someone who you can genuinely love. And that is the beginning of Scrooge McDuck is a lovable character. I would say that some of the later people like Don Rosa and some of the DuckTales too, they kind of go too far with it. They don't maintain that balance and that complexity, and that this is who this person is and this is who they've been for decades and the experiences that shape them, and almost over redeem him. They still do good work. Carl Barks also had a fairly fantastical imagination. There's fantasy elements, there's science fiction elements. This is a story where they end up... It's funny because a lot of it is just... The whole first half of the story is just a comedy story involving a quarter and Uncle Scrooge attempting to prove a point. He says, he gets into an argument with Donald about rare coins and says, "I'm the guy with all the coins. I could make a coin rare if I want." And so he decides to get all of some really common quarter that's in open circulation, gets all of them, and then destroys them all. And then he loses the quarter, and there's a chase through a pie factory and pie fights. So it's just this really silly, zany, madcap comedy about a very valuable coin. And then in the whole middle of it, it becomes, well, he has to get it back. He dumped it in the ocean. They end up discovering Atlantis. And so you get this whole Atlantis adventure in the middle of it. And then at the very end of it, he finally gets his coin back. It's the most, this shows his continuity. This is the same coin dealer that appears in that other story with Donald. And he comes here, he finally gets the quarter. It's the most valuable quarter in the world. And he comes to sell it. And the guy says, "Well, are you going to buy it or not?" He says, "Buy it." He says, "There's only one guy with enough money to buy it." He says, "Who?" "An eccentric old jillionaire named Scrooge McDuck." He realizes everything he went through is pointless and worthless. So that's sort of that's a very Barksian ending. You often get these sort of twist endings at the end of it. In comes Donald, talk about rare stamps, ends up in the trash can. So there is this very tongue-in-cheek humor and lots of twists, lots of turnovers. The stories are just great stories. There's another one in there, one of my favorites, about Scrooge trying to get away from money because it stressed him out so much, the modern world and the pursuit of wealth. And he goes to this place called Tra-la-la, which is named after Shangri-La, and accidentally ruins it with bottle caps and destroys paradise. It's interesting because he's taking things from classic literature, philosophy, and turning them into this very humorous children's story. And that's really why I love Carl Barks comics so much. And then also, as I say, the wonderful art. This is where they find the hidden valley, and they're trying to figure out how do you get down into it, and they have to jump, and the richness of it is just incredible. And it made me feel, I grew up out in the country in a very small town. I did actually get to travel way more than anyone else who lived in my hometown. Plenty of people that I grew up with had never been on an airplane before, but I always felt that I was part of a very rich world.